Good day everyone. We are the group 9 and today we will be discussing about the types of assessment. So what is assessment? Assessment is more than grading. It is about measuring the progress of student learning. Now, there are three purposes of assessment learning, namely assessment for learning, assessment of learning, and assessment as learning. To further understand the three purposes of assessment, let's have it one by one. So let's start with assessment for learning. So assessment for learning or EFL, this is the assessment para sa pagkatuto. It is a formative type of assessment used by the teacher to inform their teaching. It may occur before and throughout the learning sequence to determine progress and gaps. It may occur before and throughout the learning sequence in order to determine the progress, that means learning progress, and the learning gaps. From the word format, this means that the teacher examines all the activities in class and use those evidences whether to reteach the concept or to move on to the next lesson. So, as you can see, there are examples of assessment for learning. We have sit work, Q&A, and quizzes. So, assessment for learning is recorded but not graded. Now, let's proceed to assessment of learning or EOL. Assessment of learning is also known as the assessment ng natutunan or the assessment ng pagkatuto. It is a summative type of assessment used by the teacher to determine what the students have learned in a unit or chapter against specific standards or goal assessment of learning. It is done at the end of every unit or chapter in order to certify the students' competence. Example of assessment of learning are mastery test, periodical test, and here in college we have prelim, midterm, semifinal, and final. So assessment of learning are assessment for grading purposes, and this type of assessment are usually the one being reported. Now, let's go to assessment as learning or ESL. This is assessment bilang pagtuto. This is what we call self-assessment. This is also formative in nature, wherein the students are given the opportunity to monitor and critically reflect their own learning and prepare the necessary adjustment for their learning. This is self-directed learning as well, wherein the students use their metacognitive process to think about their own learning, what strategies to support that particular learning, and the mechanisms that will use to advance that learning. So examples of assessment as learning is reflections and insights. So assessment as learning is the highest form of assessment, and this is used for students to monitor their own learning progress. Now, let's move on to the types of assessment. We have observation checklist, anecdotal report, and portfolio assessment.
Good day, everyone. So, my topic is all about observation checklist. So, observation checklist is a list of items that an observer will look at while watching a class. The observer, the teacher, or both may have created this list. So, teachers use this checklist to evaluate each student's participation and behavior in class on an individual basis. So, here is an example of a checklist. So, number one says here, pays attention in class. So, if your student pays attention in class, you can mark 5 as the highest and 1 as the lowest. So, you can check here 1 if she or he do not pays attention in class. Another example is works well with other children. If your student works well with other children, you can check always as the highest or sometimes. Then another example is what raises his or her hand to answer a question or volunteer information. So the same goes by number 1 to number 18. So you can check the ability or the performance of your student here. So you can check number 1 if as the lowest score and 5 as the highest score. So observation checklist do not just help the students, but it also helps the teacher to strategize lessons that will encourage your students to participate in your class. So, for example, if the students do not listen to you, so you can make revisions or any strategies that will help them or to encourage them to participate in class. So teachers can quickly note information about how students perform in regard to particular outcomes from the study program using observation checklists. So the performance of students in relation to specific criteria can be monitored using observation checklists that are provided in a yes or no manner.
Anecdotal report. Anecdotal records are brief notes teachers text as they observe children. The notes document a range of behaviors in areas such as literacy, mathematics, social studies, science, the arts, social and emotional development, and physical development. Example of anecdotal evidence can be in the form of a shared experience or a narrative that makes a point. A neighbor's experience with their doctor, their review of a school, or a three-star online rating of a hotel stay are all examples of anecdotal evidence. Characteristics of anecdotal records. Anecdotal records are accounts of something someone observes or experiences. The information in the record is descriptive and qualitative in nature. They are often used to describe a particular behavior or how people react to specific events.
A portfolio assessment is a collection of student works that are associated with standards you are required to learn. This collection of works often gathered over a long period of time to reflect what you have been taught as well as what you have learned. A portfolio can include classwork, artistic pieces, photographs, and a variety of other media, all demonstrating the concepts that you have mastered. Each item that is selected to go in the portfolio is chosen within the parameters of the purpose of the portfolio itself. Portfolios typically are created for one of the following three purposes: to show growth, to showcase current abilities, and to evaluate cumulative achievement. Some examples of such purposes include growth portfolios, showcase portfolios, and evaluation portfolios. Growth portfolios have these following characteristics: to show growth or change over time, to help develop process skills such as self-evaluation and goal setting, to identify strengths and weaknesses, and lastly, to track the development of one more products or performances. The next one is the showcase portfolios. The showcase portfolios have these following characteristics: to showcase end-of-year or semester accomplishments, to prepare a sample of best work employment of college admission, to showcase student perceptions of favorite, best or most important work, and lastly, to communicate a student's current aptitudes to future teachers. And the last purpose of a portfolio is the evaluation portfolios. The evaluation portfolios have these following characteristics: to document achievement for grading purpose, to document progress towards standards, and lastly, to prepare students appropriately.
Assessment in education refers to the vast variety of techniques or tools that teachers employ to assess, evaluate, and record learners' academic preparedness, learning progress, skill development, or educational requirements. There are three main purposes of assessment as mentioned earlier. These are: number 1, assessment for learning provides students with the timely specific feedback that they need to make adjustments to their learning. Number 2, assessment of learning gives information about students' achievement. And lastly, assessment as learning develops and supports students' metacognitive skills. We have also the three types of assessment as discussed earlier. So number 1, the observation checklist. Number 2, anecdotal report. And number 3, the portfolio assessment. To sum it all up, a successful educational system or program must include assessment as a key component. Knowing whether students are learning effectively and making academic progress in school is something that educators, parents, elected officials, policymakers, employers, and the general public are all interested in. And that ends our report. Thank you for listening.